likely to do the same thing. They're less likely to be rude to a white female, things like that. So that's a good job, guys. Keep going.
Also, like, and stuff.
So, okay, yeah, exactly. So it did turn violent. So why does racism still exist today?
Their parents teach their children, just teach them why they can be racist.
So it's a taught behavior. What else?
Most people who are racist, hate other races, learn from it by go through their history, according to their history, and they hate them.
So it's the same thing as a learned behavior. But why does it still exist today? Because your parents can still teach you this kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean that's what you have to do. So what's a big cause of racism? The media. So what event took place in 1906 that the media stirred up? The Atlanta race riot. And so this stirred up this race war, this racial violence, and it was based off of a rumor. So one thing today that the media still does, the media will fuel these racial tensions. Why? What does it do for the media? It gives them money. What else does it do? It makes people want to come back and just keep watching their news stories to see what else happens. What else does this do? It makes them popular. So all of these things that they do, yeah, it gives them news stories. So if something happens here and they can cover it, then they're gonna show the people what they want to see, what they think is going to get these tensions fueled up. Then there's going to be another outbreak, just like these riots. Riots still happen today. And that's going to cause another news story. So that's a good reason why it still exists. So keep going with that, guys.
I thought it was equal, but like,
to see how it was for African Americans, and see like how they had to, like how their facilities were compared to white people.
yeah, like they had other stuff like the water fountains, like their water fountains like clean money, and the African Americans like dirty.
And they spent more money on the white stuff than they did for blacks.
Okay, and where did you find this out? In your article? Okay, so we're talking about Jim Crow laws, which is what? It is segregation. It's separate but equal. So were they equal? Well, if you think about it, a white person has a white-only water fountain, and then there's a colored water fountain. Are they both getting the same water? Yes, they are. So in the eyes of the government, is it equal? Yes, it is. But is it really equal? Why not?
Like the white people had better schools, like if you go to the movies, like black people had to go outside, the whites had safe training, and like they're really, like they're clean the white people bad on everything.
They might not even clean the color bathroom at all. So what do you think? Do you think they were equal or not? Why not? What's your opinion on it?
Like real cars, like the white people might have a real fancy one, and then the black one might have like four of them stuff.
Right, so what example of, when we're talking about rail cars, when we say Jim Crow laws, who was trying to get a movement started? Who was trying to test these laws? Yeah, Homer Plessy was. And that's exactly what he was doing, because he said it wasn't equal. Because they considered him to be white, so if he got on the train without telling them that he was one of white, they would have never known. So why were they so concerned with who sat in the white section and who sat in the white? Because they were only basing it off of appearance. So discuss that for a little bit and I'll come back.
Yeah, like, just to know that he had one of the black children in his family.
But I don't think like, is that like,
That's why they didn't stand up for it. They were afraid to change because they didn't want African Americans to take their jobs and their lifestyle.
Okay, hold on, let's go back to the beginning. What were we saying at the beginning?
Why do you think whites were against segregation, which were afraid to speak out?
Why were they afraid to speak out? What were you saying? You were using some good vocabulary.
They didn't want to end up having this.
Hold on, Luke, what were we saying?
They didn't want to, have sit-ins like against them, like where you go and sit at the bar all day and then they put pour stuff on your head and stuff. And they didn't want to be lynched or killed.
Yeah, African Americans were scared to be lynched, but are they the only ones that can be lynched during this time period?
No, like if Shania was getting like messed with by Preston because she was black, I could stand in, but that's a potentiality for Preston to start bullying me too, because I was taking sides with
Yeah. So did whites take sides of African Americans during this time period? Did they stand up?
Some of them did, the brave ones, but a lot of people didn't.
So were they going to be subjected to the same violence that African Americans were if they were white? Yeah, they would be. So they could possibly be, out of the numbers that we looked at earlier, 3,400 people were lynched. Were lynched during this time period. 2,500 of them were African Americans. So what number does that leave left?
About 900.
And that's of whites. So they were lynched as well. So, right. So why were they too afraid to speak out? Why were they afraid of change?
Because they, like, we talked about, like, segregated people are afraid of change.
Why were the whites afraid of change?
Because they thought, like, if Luke has a job and Shania is a slave and she's free, then she might have a chance of taking his job, and they didn't want that. Like, they didn't want them to take over positions in the whole new South.
Right, so they felt what?
Intimidated, scared.
They felt scared, they felt what? What else? They could have been. Did they feel threatened? Yeah, they were threatened that Shania might come in and take his job. So keep going with that, that's good, guys. What are we discussing?
They didn't think they were offending.
Which one of the methods was the worst?
Okay, which method that the Southern Democrats used to prevent African Americans from voting, which one was worse in your opinion?
We chose the grandfather clause because the poll tax took us into that. The literacy tax, they could have kept doing it over and over and over
Yeah.
to get it. And the KKK, they could have just like ignored it and just got over that. But the grandfather clause, they couldn't exactly help if their grandfather or their mother was not worth slaves or not. So it was just pretty much the heritage.
Right, so they couldn't help that they were born into a slave family, could they? What about the KKK?
They just,
Nobody agreed that was worse? It was bad. It just didn't seem as like, because you could have, even though they intimidated, you could have ignored them.
You could have ignored them.
it wasn't exactly as personal.
It wasn't as personal as the grandfather clause. That is a good reason, guys. All right, keep going with that. All right, guys, about 2 more minutes and we're going to finish our thoughts and discuss.
Yeah, they would stand at the voting polls and they would hold weapons up to make sure that they didn't try to, and they would do what everybody else would do, they'd stand. Nobody wants to get shot.
They're kind of threatening them that way, intimidating them, so,
What do you think, Mauro?
I think these volunteers also like disrespect them too. When they do that, then the whites are charged with directing.
Okay, because of disrespect? Yeah, that would be a very good reason why they used violence, because they did not want disrespect and it was an excuse to be violent as well. Do you think... Okay, hold on, let's go back to the beginning. What were we saying at the beginning?
Okay, why do you think whites who were against segregation were too afraid to speak out?
Why were they afraid to speak out? What were you saying? You were using some good vocabulary.
They didn't want to end up having this.
Hold on, Luke, what were we saying?
They didn't want to have sit-ins like against them, like where you go and sit at the bar all day and then they put pour stuff on your head and stuff. And they didn't want to be lynched or killed.
Yeah, African Americans were scared to be lynched, but are they the only ones that can be lynched during this time period?
No, like if Shania was getting like messed with by President because she was black, I could stand in, but that's a potentiality for President to start bullying me too, because I was taking sides with an African American.
Yeah. So did whites take sides of the African Americans during this time period? Did they stand up for
Some
them?
of them did, the brave ones, but a lot of people didn't.
So were they going to be subjected to the same violence that African Americans were if they were white? Yeah, they would be. So they could possibly be, out of the numbers that we looked at earlier, 3,400 people were lynched. Were lynched during this time period. 2,500 of them were African Americans. So what number does that leave left?
About 900.
And that's of whites. So they were lynched as well. So, right. So why were they too afraid to speak out? Why were they afraid of change?
Because they, like, we talked about, like, segregated people were afraid of change.
Why were the
hated
whites
blacks.
afraid of change?
Because they thought, like, if Luke has a job and Shania is a slave and she's free, then she might have a chance of taking his job, and they didn't want that. Like, they didn't want them to take over positions in the whole new South.
Right, so they felt what?
Intimidated, scared.
They felt scared, they felt what? What else?
Yeah.
They could have been. Did they feel threatened?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were threatened that Shania might come in and take his job. So keep going with that, that's good, guys.
Well, it's
What are we discussing over here?
They didn't think they were offending.
Which one of the methods was the worst?
Okay, which method that the Southern Democrats used to prevent African Americans from voting, which one was worse in your opinion?
We chose the grandfather clause because the poll tax they couldn't do that. The literacy tax they could have kept doing it over and over and over
Yeah.
to get it. And the KKK they could have just like ignored it and just got over that. But the grandfather clause they couldn't exactly help if their grandfather or their mother was not worth slaves or not. So it was just pretty much the heritage.
Right, so they couldn't help that they were born into a slave family, could they? What about the KKK?
They just
nobody agreed that was worse?
It was bad. It just didn't seem as like, because you could have, even though they intimidated, you could have ignored them.
You could have ignored them.
it wasn't exactly as personal.
It wasn't as personal as the grandfather clause. That is a good reason, guys. All right, keep going with that. All right, guys, about 2 more minutes and we're going to finish our thoughts and discuss.
Yeah, they would stand at the voting polls and they would hold weapons up to make sure that they didn't try to. And they would do what everybody else would do, they'd stand. And nobody wants to get shot.
They're kind of threatening them that way, intimidating them, so,
What do you think, Mauro?
I think these volunteer codes also like disrespect them too. When they do that, then the white side starts them directly.
Okay, because of disrespect? Yeah, that would be a very good reason why they used violence, because they did not want disrespect and it was an excuse to be violent as well. Do you think though, if whites use violence, if an African American tried to stand up for themselves, what could the whites start saying? That he started it. What else might they say about the African American race? Say it a little bit louder.
They're violent, they don't deserve their rights.
Right, they're violent, they don't deserve their rights. So all of this abuse that we've done on the African Americans previously is justified because look, he's lashing out. Why does he need his rights? Okay, guys, let's talk briefly. I want everybody to be respectful. And if you have a debate, if you disagree, let's talk about it, okay? But we're going to do it in a respectful way. This group back here in the back corner, what's your question?
What methods did Southern Democrats use to prevent African Americans from voting? Which one, in your opinion, was worse?
Okay, which method that the Southern Democrats used to prevent African Americans from voting was the worst in your opinion? The grandfather clause. And why did y'all say that?
Well, the grandfather clause, you can't exactly help where you're from. Because either your parents were or were not slaves. If you were slaves, you couldn't vote.
Right.
But the poll tax, you could just pay it off. It shouldn't be that much. And even though you're not as much, you don't have that much money, you could work and still pay for it. The literacy test, you keep taking it over and over until you understand it. And the KKK, you could just at least ignore them or find a way to avoid them.
Okay, so is everyone in agreement that the worst type of disenfranchisement was the grandfather clause? You agree? Does anybody disagree? Okay.
I kind of do, because you can't just avoid the KKK. Like, they find you, you don't find them. And it'd be hard to try to, like, avoid them.
So you think they would be the worst?
Yeah, probably.
Because what did it say in the video that they would use? What methods did they use to intimidate African Americans?
Just lynch them.
They would lynch them.
They're not standing with like voting type thing and with dangerous weapons.
They would stand at the polling place with weapons. What else did they do?
See, flog them.
They could flog them. They would use any type of violence that they could. Let's talk about. Yes, ma'am.
On that, well, if your parents were slaves and you know for a fact that you can't vote, so you wouldn't keep trying it over and over since you can't vote. But if it's just the KKK, you can keep doing it over and over. You can at least find one way to avoid them.
That's a good point. Yeah, you can find some way to try to avoid them, but you can't get past the grandfather clause because that is how you were born. You can't change who your parents were or who your grandparents were. So you have no control over that. But you can have control over possibly finding someone to educate you to read, couldn't you? You can work to get money, can't you?
Yeah.
But you can't change who you can't change your heritage. So that's a very good point. What about here? Why did whites use violence or the threat of violence to frighten or threaten African Americans?
Whites use violence or the threat of violence to frighten African Americans because they wanted to implant fear in them. So it's like if you constantly tell somebody something or constantly use violence on them, they'll start to remember that. And as they say, do something that the whites didn't like, then they'll remember that fear and that like pain, and they won't want to do it because that's what that thing, just like that, it jogs that memory and it like provokes it, and they didn't want to do it because of that. They were frightened by it.
And also, guys, another thing, if I am, what's the term I'm looking for? If I don't like blacks, if I'm racist, and if I do what? Say it louder. Discriminate against African Americans. If Katrina shows out for some reason, if she's fighting for her rights, if she is trying to go against a Klansman, a KKK member, if she's trying to use her right to vote by the 15th Amendment, if she gets irritated, what do people do when they really get frustrated sometimes? They lash out. So if Katrina lashes out because she's so frustrated, does this mean that Katrina is a mean person?
No.
Does this necessarily mean that she's a violent person?
No.
But what can I say?
Yeah.
She started it. Dangerous. Scary.
She started it. She's scary. So this does what for the whites?
It makes them kind of scared of the blacks.
It what?
Scared of the blacks.
It makes them scared of the blacks. It does what?
It gives them an advantage.
It gives them an advantage. It does what?
It makes it look like the blacks are uncontrollable, like they don't follow the rules.
It makes it look like blacks don't follow the rules, that they are uncontrollable, that they are, that they're mean, that they should not be integrated in society among the white people who are what?
Who are
Safe,
Supreme.
not violent.
Who are supreme, who are not violent, who are what?
peaceful.
Who are not necessarily peaceful, because we do see acts of violence, but who are what? More what?
Safe.
Education.
What?
Civilized.
More civilized. So they could use these means and twist some things to make it look like this race is worse than what they were back then. Yes?
Well, okay, if you know how the white people used to lynch and flog the black people who used to not obey the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if black people get what's it called, frustrated and they go off on them, then that makes them they're a bad person. So, in other words, they could just like for no reason they could just go beat them or
Right.
lynch them or anything like that.
Right. So why does, let's fast forward a little bit, and talk about racism. Why does racism still exist today? Let this group answer first.
Because, like the media is a big reason.
The media is a big reason. Andy?
The personal experiences people have had over time builds their stereotype of what they expect all the other people from a certain race to feel.
Right.
So what personal experiences build racism up more than it already is, just by the media and everything else.
And like you said, and by stereotyping. Alyssa?
They learn from their parents.
It's a learned behavior from parents. What else?
She stole mine.
She stole yours, okay. So this is one thing, guys, though, that I want you to draw a comparison to, is racism still exists today? Because the article that they had was the KKK rally in Anaheim, California 2 weeks ago. Back then, the media can twist this just like the media twisted what event in the 1900s?
The Leo, no, the.
Not the Leo Frank case,
The race riot.
the Atlanta race riot. Yeah, they twisted this. It started by rumors through the media, which was a newspaper back then. Because people didn't have the internet or cell phones like they do now. They relied on their information through newspapers. So if the newspaper said it, it must be what?
True.
It must be true. And was the Atlanta race riot what fueled this? Was it true?
No.
No, it was rumors. It was false report. What I want you to do, good discussion today, guys. You have a student self-assessment. I want you to fill this out. You are going to self-assess how prepared you are to test on the standard. One through 5. On a scale of 1 to 5, guys. 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. So you've got your rubric that needs to be complete, but right now I want your ticket out the door. So you're going to do your student self-assessment. And there's a back as well, guys. What methods are you using to study? How often are you studying? There's a few questions on here that kind of quiz you over if you are paying attention today to see how well you know this standard. So 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. On the back, you're evaluating your study skills and your participation. Have you been participating in class? Are you being vocal? Are you giving good feedback or good comments? Looks like most of you have been paying attention in class today. Can you list the 4 examples of disenfranchisement? Yep, you can. You were answering a while ago. You've been on fire the past several weeks. At the bottom, it's got a question. Where do you feel the strongest? What do you still need help with? If there's any questions that you still have, if you're confused on any bit of the information that we have discussed, this is where you can write it down. I'm going to look over these during my planning today, and we'll do groups tomorrow based on your responses. So you'll be grouped in 1, 2, or 3 based on your response from today and your readiness level. Make sure that you do your rubric at the bottom. Don't forget, you were supposed to total yourself. You're supposed to give yourself a grade. Then you're going to answer the question, what stuck with me from this discussion today? So make sure you check off your rubric. And if you have your self-assessment, you can go ahead and line up for connections.
I think we have it.